The room was quiet save for the rhythmic hum of the afternoon traffic filtering through the windows of the Los Angeles Private Investigation Agency. Betty Wilson sat behind her desk, carefully organizing files, while Barnaby Jones stood nearby, reflecting on the day's routine. The tranquility was broken when the telephone began to ring. Betty reached for the receiver, answering with her usual warmth and professionalism. She greeted the caller, confirmed that Barnaby was indeed in the office, and then turned to the veteran detective with a look of pleasant surprise. Someone was on the line asking specifically for Big Cousin Barnaby. Barnaby smiled, a spark of recognition lighting up his eyes. He noted aloud that only one of his relatives ever called him by that particular title. Taking the receiver, he inquired if he was speaking to his young cousin Monroe from Chicago. On the other end of the line, the familiar voice of Sergeant Monroe Jones confirmed his identity with enthusiasm, announcing that he had just stepped off a plane at the airport in Los Angeles. Barnaby expressed his surprise and gentle astonishment, asking why Monroe had not given him advance notice of his arrival. Monroe explained that the decision to travel had come suddenly. He revealed that he had uncovered a fresh lead on the man who had shot his police partner 6 years prior. Although the Chicago Police Department had long since closed the file on the cold case, Monroe was pursuing the matter on his own time and personal resources. Concerned for his cousin's comfort, Barnaby insisted that Monroe should not check into any motel. He declared that Monroe would be his honored house guest for as long as he chose to remain in the city. After learning that Monroe had arrived on a transcontinental flight, Barnaby instructed him to wait outside the main terminal building, promising to drive over immediately to pick him up. Hanging up the receiver, Barnaby remarked to Betty that it had been 2 decades since he had last seen his cousin. He asked her to proofread the documents on her desk while he stepped out to make the airport run. Meanwhile, in the bustling concourse of the airport terminal, Monroe Jones made his way through the moving crowds. Out of nowhere, a nervous man named Tony Ritter approached him hastily. Ritter insisted that they needed to speak immediately and urged Monroe to move away from the dense crowd. Monroe questioned Ritter's sudden urgency, reminding him that they were supposed to be working together as a team. He reminded Ritter that their agreement called for Ritter to help locate the individual who killed Monroe's partner, while Monroe would assist in clearing Ritter's standing with the Illinois Parole Board. Ritter explained his panic, stating that he had been tailing Walter Cahill ever since his last telephone conversation with Monroe. However, Ritter feared that Cahill had spotted him. Monroe criticized Ritter's carelessness, asking if he had spooked their target into hiding again. Ritter denied this, confessing that he believed he was now the one being followed. He described seeing an unfamiliar vehicle parked outside his residence the previous evening and again earlier that morning, convincing him that he was under active surveillance. Before their conversation could proceed further, a sudden silenced gunshot shattered the encounter. Monroe collapsed, fatally wounded. When the authorities arrived at the scene, Lieutenant Malcolm of the local police department conducted the initial inquiry. Examining the fallen officer's credentials, Malcolm confirmed that the victim was indeed Sergeant Monroe Jones of the Chicago Police Department. Barnaby arrived shortly thereafter, facing the heartbreaking reality of his cousin's murder. Lieutenant Malcolm expressed his condolences, asking Barnaby how close they had been. Barnaby reflected that while they only saw each other occasionally, Monroe was family. Analyzing the physical evidence, Malcolm noted that Monroe had been unable to carry his firearm on the commercial flight and had stowed it in his luggage. The open suitcase indicated that Monroe was attempting to reach his weapon when the attacker struck. Because no witnesses heard the fatal shot, Malcolm concluded that the assailant used a suppressor. When asked if he knew the motive behind the murder, Barnaby explained that Monroe had traveled to California to track down the fugitive responsible for his partner's death 6 years ago, and it appeared he had tragically located his suspect. Determined to notify Monroe's immediate family himself, Barnaby prepared to place a difficult long-distance call to Chicago. He remarked to Malcolm that he would rather face a severe physical whipping than deliver such painful news to Monroe's son. Later that afternoon at the agency, Betty was attending to administrative tasks when a determined young man pushed past her into the inner office. Betty tried to intercept him, apologizing to Barnaby for being unable to stop the visitor. Barnaby recognized the young man immediately as Jedediah Jones, Monroe's son. Barnaby welcomed his young relative warmly, acknowledging that while it had been a very long time, he knew Jedediah on sight. Jedediah, driven by grief and anger, explained that he could not remain sitting idle in Chicago while his father's killer remained free. He described how his father had not taken a proper vacation in over 10 years, ever since his mother had passed away. His father had received a crucial telephone call regarding the man who had murdered his partner, prompting him to travel across the country on his own time. Jedediah challenged Barnaby directly, pointing out that 7 hours had passed since the murder and demanding to know why Barnaby appeared to be sitting in his office doing nothing to pursue the killer. Betty attempted to intervene, reassuring Jedediah that Barnaby was actively working on the case, but Barnaby gently motioned for her to let him address his nephew directly. Barnaby showed Jedediah the official Chicago police file regarding the 6-year-old homicide case involving Monroe's partner. He explained that he had called in several personal favors to obtain the records so quickly. Jedediah recognized the case background, recalling that his father had kept a blow-up photograph of the primary suspect on his desk both at the police station and at home. The pursuit of Walter Cahill had become an overwhelming focus for Monroe. Jedediah offered to share every detail he knew about his father's recent efforts, promising to seek out any missing information. Realizing the intense emotional toll on everyone, Barnaby suggested they take a break to get something to eat, noting that Jedediah was likely still adjusted to Chicago time. Jedediah agreed, and the two set out together. In another part of the city, Tony Ritter frantically sought out his brother, Richie, at a local meeting place. When Richie arrived, Tony explained that he was in severe danger and needed immediate help. A relentless attacker had already fired 2 shots at him earlier that morning, forcing him to make plans to flee the city. Desperate for financial means, Tony asked if Richie had any cash available. Richie replied that his funds were extremely tight at the moment, as he was waiting for his payday on Thursday for a major plumbing installation job he was performing. Tony argued that he could be dead before Thursday arrived and begged Richie to request an advance on his wages from his employer. Richie expressed doubt, explaining that he had only worked for the contractor for 2 weeks, but he promised to try his best to secure the funds. Meanwhile, Barnaby and Jedediah positioned themselves at a local neighborhood bar, waiting for a trusted local contact who possessed deep knowledge of the area's street life. Jedediah questioned the wisdom of waiting around in a tavern rather than actively searching the streets, but Barnaby explained that his informant frequented several establishments along the strip, making this location the most effective point of contact. Shortly thereafter, a woman named Sue Ellen greeted Barnaby. Barnaby introduced Jedediah, who preferred to be called Jar. Barnaby inquired if Sue Ellen recognized a man named Tony Ritter, recently arrived from Chicago. Sue Ellen recalled the name, noting that while she had not seen Tony recently, she was acquainted with his brother, Richie. Although she did not know their residential addresses, she recalled that Richie worked as a plumber, wearing work overalls featuring a graphic illustration of a water faucet above the word plumbing. Barnaby thanked her warmly for the valuable lead. Armed with this information, Barnaby contacted Betty and asked her to get in touch with a local plumbers union to determine the current job site assignment for Richie Ritter. Across town, in an upscale suburban residence, Thomas Brenner was preparing for his morning routine. His wife, Carol, suggested they have breakfast outside, but Thomas indicated he only wanted juice and coffee because he needed to arrive at his office early. Carol playfully teased him about working too hard, reminding him that marrying the boss's daughter was supposed to grant him a relaxed schedule. Thomas smiled, remarking on their 5 years of marriage, before taking his coffee. The telephone rang and Thomas answered it. The voice on the line belonged to Tony Ritter, who identified Thomas Brenner by his true name, Walter Cahill. Tony accused Brenner of firing shots at him since the previous morning. When Brenner attempted to deny the claim and threat of calling the police, Tony scoffed, pointing out that Brenner could not afford police involvement given his hidden identity. Tony offered a proposition. In exchange for financial compensation, he would leave Los Angeles permanently and disappear. He demanded $10,000 immediately, adding that for an additional $5,000, he would leave the country entirely, perhaps relocating to Mexico. Realizing the necessity of silencing his blackmailer, Brenner agreed to the terms, instructing Tony that he had 2 hours to gather the funds. Brenner stated he would call his office to arrange a meeting place, while Tony warned that any failure to meet the arrangement would result in an immediate call to law enforcement, revealing the secret life of Walter Cahill. Richie Ritter was at his worksite when he was called to take a telephone call from his brother. Tony excitedly informed Richie that the situation had turned entirely in their favor. He claimed that the man who had been hunting him had agreed to pay $15,000 in cash. Tony urged Richie to quit his job immediately so they could depart for Mexico as soon as the money was collected. Richie expressed deep concern, questioning the safety of meeting a dangerous killer. Tony reassured him that the exchange would take place in a crowded public area at the Bay Ridge Plaza shopping center, where the presence of numerous bystanders would prevent any violence. Despite Richie's persistent bad feeling about the arrangement, Tony insisted on going through with the meeting and hung up the telephone. Barnaby and JAR arrived at Richie's work location shortly after the call. Seeing them approach, Richie attempted to flee, but Barnaby intercepted him, explaining that he was a private investigator who only wanted to talk. Barnaby apologized for JAR's aggressive demeanor, explaining that JAR's father had been murdered the previous day. Barnaby explained that the individual who killed Monroe was actively searching for Tony. Richie confessed that Tony had gone to meet Cahill at the Bay Ridge Plaza to collect a payoff to leave town. He described Tony's vehicle as an older, beat-up 2-door white sedan. Realizing the immense danger Tony was in, Barnaby and JAR rushed toward the shopping center. At the Bay Ridge Plaza, Tony waited in his vehicle as Thomas Brenner approached. Brenner handed over a bag containing $15,000 in small bills. He instructed Tony to place the money on the hood of the car, turn around, and walk away. As Tony complied, believing he had successfully secured his escape, Brenner quietly drew a concealed firearm equipped with a suppressor and shot Tony, killing him instantly before fleeing the scene. When Barnaby and JAR arrived at the parking lot, they discovered Tony's body beside his vehicle. Law enforcement secured the scene, and Richie arrived shortly thereafter, devastated by the loss of his older brother. Richie reflected on how Tony had spent the previous night and morning at his apartment trying to protect him. Investigating how Tony had managed to contact Brenner, Barnaby noted that Richie's apartment lacked a telephone, meaning Tony must have used the public payphone in the building's hallway. Inspecting the wall near the payphone, Barnaby discovered a scribbled telephone number pressed deeply into the plaster. Recognizing Tony's handwriting, Richie confirmed the number. Barnaby traced the number to the Martinson Building Supply Company, a large business located in the Topanga area near where Tony had been killed. The company routinely handled industrial explosives for major construction projects. Barnaby and JAR visited the corporate office to investigate. A receptionist reviewed the old mugshot of Walter Cahill. She noted that while the individual in the photograph had different hair, he bore a strong resemblance to 3 or 4 employees in the building, specifically mentioning Jim Thompson, Mr. Talbot, and Thomas Brenner. Barnaby expressed his gratitude for her assistance and proceeded toward the personnel office to narrow down the identities. Observing the interaction from a distance, Thomas Brenner approached the receptionist after the investigators left. She informed him that 2 men were conducting an inquiry using an old police photograph. Recognizing the grave threat to his covert life, Brenner immediately instructed his secretary to cancel his appointments for the day and indicated he might need to leave town for several days. Brenner then telephoned his wife, Carol, urging her to meet him immediately at the Spindrift location at the marina. When Carol arrived, she confronted him about the visit from the 2 investigators who had shown her the police photograph. Brenner confessed that he was indeed the man depicted in the photo, acknowledging his criminal past and prior record. He insisted to Carol that he had transformed into a completely different person during their 5 years of marriage, expressing his deep love for her. Carol reaffirmed her devotion to him, but Brenner warned her that if his past caught up with him, they might be forced to leave their friends, family, and current life behind to relocate far away. Carol expressed uncertainty about abandoning her entire life, prompting Brenner to declare that he would handle the situation himself so they would no longer have to worry. Meanwhile, Barnaby conducted background checks on the 3 employees identified at the supply company. While Jim Thompson and Mr. Talbot possessed fully verified histories, Thomas Brenner's background presented major inconsistencies. Brenner claimed to have moved from Miami 5 years earlier after selling a demolition business, using the proceeds to buy into the Martinson Company. However, official records from Dade County revealed no record of Brenner ever owning or selling such a business. Barnaby concluded that Brenner was in fact Walter Cahill, using stolen jewel heist funds to establish his new identity. Barnaby, JAR, and Betty gathered at the agency to coordinate their next move. Betty attempted to call the Brenner residence, but received no answer. Barnaby decided to visit Mr. Martinson directly to ascertain Brenner's whereabouts. JAR, feeling impatient, declined to accompany him. After Barnaby departed, JAR waited in the office and took a telephone call from Carol Brenner. Posing as an investigator, JAR asked for her husband's current location. Carol revealed that Thomas had driven up to Santa Barbara that morning to inspect real estate in the Montecito area on Hillview Drive. Once the call ended, JAR located Barnaby's spare handgun stored in a desk drawer. Betty attempted to stop him, reminding him that he did not possess a license to carry a firearm and urging him to wait for Barnaby. Driven by intense emotion, JAR declared that his father was lying in the morgue, which provided all the justification he required. He ignored Betty's pleas and left immediately for Santa Barbara. Realizing the extreme danger, Betty called Mr. Martinson's office to leave an urgent message for Barnaby to contact her right away. When Barnaby returned her call, Betty informed him that JAR had taken his spare firearm and was heading directly to Hillview Drive in Montecito to confront Cahill alone. Barnaby immediately set out for Santa Barbara to intercept his young relative. JAR arrived at the quiet residential property on Hillview Drive and entered the house, searching for Brenner. Brenner, aware of his presence, ambushed JAR from behind, holding him at gunpoint. Brenner demanded to know the location of the older investigator, expecting both men to arrive together.